So, meine Damen und Herren, liebe Gäste, schön.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to see you all coming back after this hopefully good and reinforcing lunch at a conference which offers a lot of food for thought in very adventurous times, as we have jointly identified. Now, let's move on in our program. A warm welcome to Franziska Brantner at this point. Nice to have you.
Liebe Franziska, du bist
Dear Franziska, you have been federal chair of Alliance 90 The Greens since 2024, and you were previously parliamentary state secretary at the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy, responsible for foreign trade and European policy. So you are in an excellent position to take us along on a journey through your perspective. You have been a member of the German Bundestag since 2013, and you were also a member of the European Parliament. We have spent some time on this journey together. This morning we had a great debate and also a great keynote from Pavlo Klimkin. And at this point, I believe we have indeed perceived that it's, on the one hand, quite a complex task to find the answer to the question we're asking here. On the other hand, there's also urgency to answer this question, and on the other hand, also to counter the changed challenges. There have been many good starting points mentioned, and at times of global uncertainty, new lines of conflict, and an ongoing struggle for values, influence, and resources, clear analysis and political orientation is all the more important. We therefore appreciate all the more that you, Franziska, are taking the time to be with us today. We're eager to hear your assessment of the current foreign and security policy situation. The floor is yours.
Herzlichen Dank.
Many thanks, dear Jan. Ladies and gentlemen,
Treffen sich Putin, Trump, Jong-un
and Khamenei meet in a bar and establish a nuclear alliance. Is that a joke or reality? Tough geopolitical reality of the debates. Things all of us probably could not have imagined 10 years ago. And the question is, of course, what is happening in a world where zero sums is the only currency and eagerness to destroy is the only thing that governs the world? What happens if Putin integrates the world into his imperium, into his empire of nonsense? What becomes of the US, where violence becomes everyday life and democracy becomes a foreign word? What becomes of our democratic partners in Israel, where a partly right-wing extremist government covers the sky with dust in Gaza while still not freeing the hostages from Hamas custody? Taking a look at the German government, we see foreign policy copies of the willingness to support that this is what is carried into the world. But if we take a look at what's being done and what does the federal budget look like, then we know that there is a big gap. As I see it, the coalition has a big problem. It wants to be the friend of everyone and itself does not want to stand up for many things. Germany might be back, but without clarity, in the best case, and in the worst case, as an obstacle to European positioning. So what is needed at these times from a Green Party perspective? And I would like to enumerate a few points. 5 ones, in fact. The first point is a strong European Union, but, and here I want to be very clear, in shared action with our global cooperation partners, Australia, Japan, South Korea, but also Brazil, India, South Africa, and yes, also China. We have to stop mincing words, and I believe the way we use words, the word EU-US deal, This word should be cut out, because the outcome Ms. von der Leyen and Mr. Trump achieved is not a deal. Rather, it's the result of blackmail.
And to
pronounce at such clarity what's happening here, we are being blackmailed, and then you take a look at and to try to make sure that the result is not too bad, then this is not what we would regard as a deal or trade-off or negotiation, and the way they should be. I'm convinced that we as Europeans should clearly send a signal that we do not allow ourselves to be blackmailed by a man who himself would start wars to then say afterwards that he terminated them. And if we take this seriously, the stronger independence and the partnerships, then this is one clear partisanship against digital sovereignty. The cabinet meeting will take place this week, but actually the central element will be missing, namely truly European digital sovereignty to be also implemented as part of the digitization move. Why is it that the federal government still is sourcing with the great and big American groups of companies? Why is it that we don't use our own procurement power and rely on European players, no matter whether at country or municipal or European level? It does not need to work immediately, but we need to open this prospect and invest if we really are serious. I know that this is not always easy, particularly not for us Greens, to say let's rely on European technology, but I'm firmly convinced if we don't open up the dependencies we have in place, we will always allow ourselves to be blackmailed. So this blackmailability should not just be deplored, it must be fought against and tackled. This also applies, and this is something I saw with great worry, that the German-French enlarged armament projects are on the point of failure. In the face of the fact that we have so much money and we raised our hand for that, I really invite the German government to ensure with all its might that these projects can be successful. It's not easy, but to give them up would be the absolutely wrong signal at this time. It's truly one of the German-French tasks for me, which are not easy. But you cannot just celebrate oneself for reaching agreement on nuclear energy and energy at large. But these days we need to reach agreement on defense. And this is actually the task this federal German government has. And when we talk about dependencies, it's also about China and raw materials. As the previous government, we have started a few things in terms of raw materials. Still, we are not up to speed because the current government is too slow in implementation, and the Federal Ministry of Finance is still blocking moves, as far as I know. So blackmailing potential of other players must be built down. We must to invest as Europeans in these fields, build sources, drive innovation. My second point, and now I want to address the Ukraine war and Ukraine. Everyone went to Ukraine in the past days and weeks, and everyone promised more support. But if we take a look at the budget bill, a reduction by 10 billion is envisaged, and I believe it is dishonest if one constantly pretends that one wants to strengthen the support to Ukraine while at the same time one is saving money. This is another reason why military assistance, but also assistance in general for Ukraine, must be increased before it's too late for all of us. And this is one of the reasons why we Greens have cleared the special fund access and were ready to embark on new routes. Here, too, we need to be clearer when it comes to UAV, when it comes to sabotage, saying that the hybrid war is already taking place. It's going on. If you take a map of Germany and indicate all incidents of the past years in that map, the map would be quite filled up. And this is why it is important to define this in a context, rather than here one thing, there one thing, here an energy infrastructure, there a drone, and here an intervention. No, the whole picture of hybrid warfare must be seen, must be defined and tackled. And Mr. Dobrindt may as well build a center of excellence, but such a center will not help without excellence. And this is something we, as the previous coalition, would have moved on a long time ago. He would actually just have needed to implement what we had planned. So let's be clear in our language and let's apply the standard of action to what the government is doing. My third point, we need a true European foreign policy with all of Europe uniform for peace and security in Palestine and Israel. I'm convinced that if Europe does not manage to become capable to act, that for years and decades our neighborhood, but also European capacity to act will be made more difficult. We now see our joint task as European partners to drive an opportunity for the two-state solution to become real. And this means putting pressure on the Israeli government, on Hamas, and I'm glad that Saudi Arabia and Egypt have also started to clearly articulate that, and that we now have the chance to contribute to a political process. The never-ending war only helped all extreme forces in the region and no citizens, no matter whether on Palestinian or Israeli side. So this is our task, and I know for us Greens it's difficult because if we say what we need is European position, then you can either accept the proposals tabled by Mrs. von der Leyen, and you can also table own ones. I'm open to that. It's not that we need to agree to that one-to-one, but the current government just only says no, and this is what prevents a European positioning at the end of the day. We're not interested in being Trump the only one acting in this region. Here's my fourth point: increase in development, cooperation, and humanitarian aid. I believe we must make ourselves more heard in saying that the richest men in the world find it extremely satisfying to shorten the funds the poorest people in the world have. It's the richest people. Trump doubled his wealth during 1 year of reign, and everyone who was on board Dodge are among the richest in the world. It must be clearly articulated that their keenest interest was in denying the poorest in the world the support of America. We have to make sure that not the same thing happens in Germany, rather that our German monies continue to be paid over to those who in other countries of the world fight for their own infrastructure, education, and need our support for that. And in the end, here's my fifth point. All that I was talking about Europe, I was talking about clarity, is prevented by the unanimity at European level in foreign policy. And all attempts at making progress of the preceding government in the past years and decades failed. At the same time, we see that we need countries who are no longer in the EU to secure European peace. It's the UK, but also countries like Norway. We would actually need them in order to define and move ahead our security. And this is why it is maybe high time, and this is with a question mark what I'm saying, to dare thinking about new routes, a European Security Council that reunites those countries who are needed for European security, mainly, or maybe just an advisory role for the NATO or EU, but that allows to run discussions at that level and maybe drive decisions jointly and maybe also implement them in the end of the day. But we must be able to leave this unanimity mode and must integrate those countries who are relevant for the reality of European peace. Neither NATO nor the EU alone at the moment can enable that. But I do think we need new communication channels, and it can't be just the big three, France, UK, and Germany. We also need Poland in the long run. We need the Spaniards, and to integrate these countries, we also need representation of the smaller ones. This seems necessary to be making honest progress as Europeans. Maybe there are other better ideas. My impression is that we must persevere in striving for doing away with unanimity. It's not in line with the urgency we currently need, but it's based on wishful thinking, which may be good, but not any longer in line with the urgency and the need for changes in the European capability to act. At the end, I would like to refer to something. Yesterday night, I was in a reading evening. Caroline Imke published a book, 10 years of articles in Süddeutsche Zeitung. And if you listen to that, you see what things have radically changed over 10 years. And you think, hey, that's weird. It's just 10 years ago. But the good thing is, when things can change so massively in 10 years, then in the next 10 years, maybe things may move in a different direction. So it's not said that we can only move into one direction in the next 10 years. It depends strongly on what we do, whether we are clear enough and strong enough to move into a different direction in the next 10 years, so that people in 10 years' time may say, oh my God, was that bad and dangerous at the time. Fortunately, good steps have been taken. And I end with a quote of James Baldwin, you may know it. I think this is always instilling power in us. We all wish there would be more humanity in this world.
But there is enough.
But there is enough.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much.
So, liebe Franziska, vielen Dank. Ein klares Plädoyer auch am Ende. Vielen Dank dafür.
This is a clear pledge also at the end, and thank you, Franziska, for your remarks. I think they very well fit into the discussion that we will be having now. Well, until we have the next panel discussion, maybe we can hear one or two questions for Ms. Brantner. If nobody has a question, I would have one, but first of all, the floor is open for questions from the audience. And maybe questions from women.
Ich schraube die Anforderungen hoch und habe die Zeit schon als enges Korsett beschrieben.
Really, I'm raising the yardstick here. But anyways, if there are no questions, let me ask one. You have focused on what we could do as Europeans at the moment in order to continue to strengthen the security architecture. You said we could become more secure, and we must not be coerced by any dependencies. But you also raised the question of a continued integration and, well, anything beyond unanimity in EU and NATO. What I can see instead is really a take-home message from players who dare make this their central point of communication.
Das Einzige, was wir sehen,
the only thing that we see is a higher degree of like famous triangle, or also discussions with Great Britain. The Baltic states are very strong, and they would love to be part of such a body if you talk about a Security Council. But who really has to take the initiative in Germany so that people see it as an offering? Well, I can only see current developments that we have the Weimar format and another discussion format +3, and then discussions with Turkey and it all happens in parallel. And then suddenly there's pressure to decide who can go to Trump in the US. Mr. Schrock, for example, because Trump likes him, but there is no underlying system. There is no systematic approach. My question is, how can all the needs be reconciled and streamlined so that they develop a dynamism? And, well, of course, there have to be the three plus Poland and Southern Europe, such as Italy and Spain, needs to be integrated, as well as the Baltic states, plus UK. Manage that diversity. One would have to discuss about Turkey, countries such as Norway, so that you have the right discussion framework. And then potentially such trips or formats could be devised on that basis. And we have a foreign minister in March. He said he wanted to act on a European basis. He wanted to turn Europe into the global player that it needs to be. And to me, this really would have to be embedded in a stronger cooperation with other regions in the world, like Canada, Japan, EU. They're all negotiating separately. So why are we not joining shoulders? So we'll go together with the Japanese, the Brazilians, together with Lula, and so that Lula doesn't let us fight alone, and vice versa. And this would be the right strategy. Like, who do we need? This should be, it is like divide and rule. But if we joined shoulders, we would really be able to leverage that potential coordination, joining shoulders, building a capacity. But it could be like a foreign minister. And I think there is a big need for action, and there is an urgency. So we can't wait until every component is perfect. You know, the wording doesn't matter. But it's the essence that does. Okay, thank you. Another question on that. You mentioned that in 10 years a lot has happened, and in 10 years to come things may have changed. And now with Donald Trump's speech, we have just seen this week that there's a very powerful movement that is really focusing only on domestic policy and its own strength, and the international framework is really being neglected, and this in a very condescendent manner if you talk about Trump. But others are interested. There were not so many heads of state and government to openly criticize Trump, and these people, you know, the other heads of government and state, if you mention the Federalist Chancellor and the Foreign Minister, they need a capacity to sell the urgency and the value of joined shoulders. So where do you think multilateralism, joint action, and strengthening Europe make sense? That there will be an added value that we need to focus on. Well, first of all, I don't think that anyone would simply contradict Trump. This usually doesn't happen in isolation, but it's really in the course of multilateral meetings, if everybody is able to take the floor. Maybe it's somebody especially courageous, but basically nobody like Latin America or anyone would openly contradict Trump. As I said, if you do, you need big alliances. But what is behind Trump's model? I mean, one part of globalization criticism that we did have, he really exaggerated it, like jobs are relocated to other parts of the world. There is unfair competition. Who benefits? Basically, it's only the big players. This is somewhat absurd because he's closing off, and if you then think who is really winning and benefiting from this situation, it is the ultra-rich. It doesn't benefit the poor. And he only tries to suggest that his policy benefits the poor. And we, as the Greens, maybe in worldwide alliances, do have criticism, and we can counteract that criticism. And if it is only Trump's rhetoric, then he will not be effective. So if you become more independent in partnerships, and if unfair dumping will be fought. So, but then we need to suggest alternatives that we all need to show. So it is not about Trump's rhetoric, but what is scary about it, the applause. And it was exactly the applause that we heard. Who benefits from globalization? And this, feeling, this uncomfortable feeling when he's talking, this is so sad about it. There was nobody from Europe who said there is another model that enables trade and cooperation without mutual exploitation, and that reflects and only increases the social gap. And this is really the task of Europe, not Europe alone, but anyways, this is what you would need to argue. It is not helpful to say that Trump's rhetoric is stupid. This is not helpful. And we have approaches among the Greens. I wouldn't say they have been finalized, but this is really our task and mission to develop partnerships in that sense. Thank you, Franziska. We want to continue along these lines, and we now have to make room for the next panel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Ja, vielen Dank, Franziska, auch nochmal für diesen
very much, Franziska, also for these interesting words. And this is again an ideal basis for our subsequent panel discussion. I'm very glad to welcome the afternoon panelists. It's really great to see you in such great numbers. And by the way, we do have vacant seats over here if you'd like to take one. And for those of us who have joined us in the meantime, I will be facilitating the next panel discussion, and we will be talking about threats along our borders. And well, it is also in the second keynote that we heard about threats. There was a lot of talk about sabotage and the undersea cable in the Baltic Sea, and then airports and power stations, espionage and attacks by drones. And in the past few days we've seen it, and like the drones in also fighter jets in the Baltics, and the quality of assaults and also the quality of these hybrid assaults have really reached a new dimension. Another aspect that has also become clear in the past panel discussion, in order to illustrate the link between these, our security is strategized, because it is especially open and democratic societies are especially vulnerable towards the tactics of hybrid warfare, because the goal of such attacks go beyond jurisdictions, across national borders. They use legal loopholes and they use the interfaces of public authorities and federal systems. And there is another aspect. It is especially nowadays that you need valid answers and preventive action, so that these assaults, and these provocations of borders also, there are limits between war and peace. With a view to these threats, we want to have a panel debate here. Our panelists come from various backgrounds, and I would now like to ask them to join me here. General Schrödl, Maxime Lebrun, Beverly Ochieng, Akira Igata, and online,
MdB Sara Nanni.
Member of Parliament Sara Nanni.
Ich beginne mit einer kurzen Vorstellungsrunde.
Let me start off with a short round of introduction. We have Jürgen Schrödl here. He's Chief of Division 3 in the NEO sub-department. And this means that he is responsible. He was a subdivision manager for military strategy, deployment and operations at Hamburg University. He has studied at the Armed Forces Universities in Munich and Hamburg. Thank you for joining us today.
Daneben Beverly Ochieng.
Beverly Ochieng, sitting next to him, she is a Senior Associate Africa Program CSIS Senior Analyst Control Risk, but she's also got a background in literature and the media. She was a co-host of a successful podcast between 2015 and 2018, Two Girls and a Pod, and she has worked on Russia's Wagner Group in Mali, Sudan, and Central African Republic. Thank you for joining us. Great to have you here.
Maxime Lebrun.
Maxime Lebrun, he is a Deputy Director of R&A, European Center of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats in Helsinki. And before, he worked at the Baltic Defense College in Tartu and as a lecturer in war and conflict studies and an acting department director. And he also works at Sciences Po Lyon. And the manager of advanced technologies at Tokyo University. He went under, yes, a special focus on the India and Pacific. He's also an adjunct senior fellow in different research programs. Thank you for being here.
Und last but not least, keine Unbekannte in diesem Haus, MdB Sara Nanni. Ich freue mich, dass Sie dir auch außerhalb einer Sitzungswoche Zeit nimmst für dieses Gespräch.
You're a member of Parliament. Thank you for joining us here since 2021. She has been a German Parliament member for goodness 90 the Greens, and she works on the Working Group on Security, Peace and Disarmament, chairwoman of the Defense Committee and Committee of Inquiry on Afghanistan.
And
we have said it, Mr. Schrödl, we are confronted with these facts in the media. In 2022, the Defense Against Hybrid Threats has already already been declared a priority, and maybe we can include it in the concept and your evaluation of the current hybrid attack situation and your ability to react. What are the challenges? What are maybe also progress? Success. Well, I was really happy about the facilitation of the panel because with the introductory statement, a good assessment of the situation was already given. Hybrid threats and hybrid campaigns, can I define them, please? Everybody has their own idea, but let us become clear in linguistic terms. Well, in our group, a hybrid action, a hybrid threat is a coordinated illegitimate act of a state or non-state body, cover or undercover, with the aim of doing things at the disadvantage of the party. That is their goal. But in order to get the name hybrid, it needs to be below the framework of a conventional military assault. So a hybrid threat and hybrid action, this is how we define it. And if we remember what hybrid threats target, our Bundestag, the heart of the democracy, or also the regional police of Mecklenburg-West Pomerania, and also flight security last year. All these were campaigns where one tries to undermine our ability to function as a state. The drone attacks on Denmark, why there? Well, there is an EU summit, so they're trying to go to the executive level and add the borders and the regional borders. It does not halt. And what is somewhat new, at least, is using people as disposable, like low-level agents that have been hired for sabotage campaigns in order to harm German infrastructure. And what is the target? Sometimes it is, well, kind of occasional actions. But basically, all of us in this room are a target, and it is about rifting society. With the military jargon, one would say the center of gravity has been defined, so where it wants to become effective, and that's all of us. And our entire societal system should become dysfunctional, and it should be the basis of our democracy. So this basis is to be removed. And ultimately, it is also about the fact that it all states belong a certain threshold. Security forces should be subject to espionage, and we should get the image of being helpful. And why are we in a focus here in Germany? Well, let me make this clear.
On the one hand, we have now, and this applies much more in future, the conventional cornerstone of alliance defense in NATO. We will in the future have to take the main burden of defense in Europe. In the end of the day, I mean, we are currently the main supporter to Ukraine in Europe, and our dependence on energy from the Russians has been reduced. All these are criteria why we move into the focus. And this is why it's already at stake, and this is what I'm saying as a military person, to address this topic with civil resources and with sensitivity to avoid the use of military force later on. Thank you so much for this start of the round and also clarifying the term. I think this is of central importance for this discussion. If I may, can I ask you a short follow-up question on that? On the one hand, you mentioned that these attacks are always below the threshold of conventional combat. However, you in your role also see how difficult it is to unequivocally assign these attacks to players. The question is, and here I would like to get to another point you mentioned, how under these conditions, how can legitimate and effective defense look like, and what role can be played by civil means, like under the headline of total defense? Well, I have tried to express that. You know, civil means are key. We as military can only flank this. On the one hand, in analyzing the situation where we find that certain situation pictures can be brought together, military and non-military, to say where are there any actions, what do we have to expect, so we can add our analyses to the system. Here, it's about being capable of action domestically too, and within Germany, I think we need to take one or the other step. The military is not capable of doing everything and is not meant to. There's a clear separation between domestic and external security, and through these hybrid threats, this becomes to be blurred a bit more. But everyone needs to know what their role and responsibility is and what everyone can contribute. I think we need to much more take a joint look at things and jointly assess the situation. Fending off drones, that's one thing. We as a society, that is the Ministry of Domestic Affairs and the Ministry of Defense, together must take further steps to make much more progress here. Thank you very much for this supplementary comment. Maxime, your center in Helsinki at a very early time pointed out the multi-layered nature of hybrid threat. At the same time, as it has been mentioned here today, everyone's talking about that this is criticized a lot because of the fuzziness in terms of the concept, but also because of the military origins. Maybe you can tell us how this term of hybridity has changed over the past years and in what way it differs from other security policy concepts like comprehensive security.
Yes, thank you very much. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm also thankful for the opening remarks of the General Schrödl, because he has made my job a little bit easier as well. He has laid out the conceptual basis, which are classical and needed to be understood. I would like to go a little bit further in a way of framing the concept of hybrid threats and indeed how it has evolved. And I would like to offer you a few considerations regarding the concept itself. So the first consideration is that I think hybrid threats and hybrid threat actions or hybrid warfare, however you want to call it, they are operations and strategies in order to reach ends through other means than brute military force. I think that's the key idea to summarize what you've just said. But to that, I would add that there is an element of surprise. The idea behind hybrid threat activity is to surprise the adversary and to make it hard to formulate answers, to make it hard to characterize the situation, to understand what is actually happening, and to actually connect the dots. Because although hybrid warfare and hybrid threat is not a new concept, and the idea to surprise you adversary is as old as warfare, I would say, the need to connect the dots is still a continuous need that we see on a daily basis with our policymakers, with our decision makers as well, to make them understand that provocative actions somewhere are linked perhaps to another event somewhere else. So this element of surprise is very important. The second element I would like to add to your definition, to your opening remarks, is the aspect that we see a weaponization of pretty much everything else than military force in order to reach objectives. And here I would like to make a strong distinction between what is happening in Ukraine, which is bluntly a total war, which is involving the whole of society, and which has elements of 20th century warfare and of the most technological drone-reliant warfare as well. So to me, this is not hybrid warfare. This is a full-on war. But what is happening elsewhere in Europe, for example, the drones, the aerial incursions into NATO airspace, those are things that are happening under the threshold in an asymmetric manner, in order to surprise, in order to make it difficult to respond, in order to also make our governments look bad. Why do you allow drones to fly 50 kilometers into Poland without shooting them down? Well, the answer to that question is a bit more complicated than the question itself, of course. But that is the idea, to weaponize other instruments than brute military power. There is also another aspect that I would like to add, is that the goal of hybrid activity is to trap the target into a bad reaction, into an overreaction, into an underreaction, basically into a reaction that doesn't strike the mark. And that makes us look either weak, either inadapted, either hysterical as well, because that's also an aspect that needs to be quite emphasized. Something that I would like to also expand a little bit about is that the use of hybrid activity is a function of weakness as well. This is something that we need to understand as well, because that helps us understand the ultimate goal of our adversaries. Using hybrid activity in order to reach a political goal means that you cannot use the force to do that, that there would not be any utility of the force in conducting an offensive operation in order to reach your objective. So that's why we need to understand, and that's kind of conceptual as well, that the use of hybrid activity is a function to the decreased utility of the force in the offense. What does it speak about? Because it's not just words. It's not just words in the air. I think the so what of this specific force consideration is that there is a continuous relevance to invest in defense spending in Europe, and I think that's the 5% step is a really good step, so that we kind of keep the confrontation at the hybrid warfare level or a hybrid activity level, in order not to incite our adversaries to test some other boundaries which might be more kinetic and which might do more harm. So I think that is that is something that I wanted to kind of underline as well. A few more considerations on a strategic level to kind of characterize what is the challenge of hybrid activity. It's a challenge of breaking the rules as well. We see that all of those activities, they, by definition, do not abide by international law. So they also kind of place themselves in these long strings of violation of international law, which some great powers consider it to be their full right not to respect international law. And in their narrative, they consider that international law is for the smaller powers, it's not for the big powers. So that's also a function of that. The goal of hybrid activity is, yes, indeed, to destabilize our societies, to make us doubt on our own security and on the capacity of our states to deliver security. But it's also on the goal is also the undoing of the unity of our alliances. The fly out of drones, which might very well link to the European Political Community Summit as well, is also in a way meant to for the Russians, it's if it's them, of course, but whoever is flying those drones is seeking information as to how do we react, how fast do we react, are there divisions within our societies, what is the reaction of the global of the civil population towards the communication of the government. So it can be that. But what I think as well is that whoever is doing that also is messaging power in disproportion to its real power, in a way. It's also, and if it is a state actor behind, it's also linked to a certain diplomacy of terror as well, to try to scare our public opinion, to try to scare our government, and to make us look weak, frankly. Yes, I think that was all that I had for the first opening, and happy to continue.
Thank you so much. Vielen Dank, dass Sie uns einmal mitgenommen haben in einige.
Thank you for taking us along on this journey.
Der Spannungsfelder, die diese
to some of the stress fields this debate is on. Also, can I ask one short follow-up question to you? Namely, what would you say makes hybrid tactics so effective from the perspective of the doers? And what are the structural weaknesses of democratic states in fending off these attacks?
Thanks. Well, I think what makes it successful is the reaction. The field of hybrid threat is so diverse that it is difficult to pinpoint success factors in every single domain, because in our conceptual framework of hybrid threat, we speak about 13 domains of activity ranging from the cultural level to the political level to the social level to the economic, etc., etc. So it would be difficult to pinpoint each and every success factors in all of those domains. But the reaction, how we speak about how do we characterize this situation, that makes it successful or not. To take but an example, and I would underline that the investigation on that case is still ongoing, so I'm not taking a position on attribution or responsibility in that case. But a few weeks ago, it appeared that some pigs' heads were displayed in front of mosques in the Paris region. It appears from the preliminary elements that those pig heads were bought in Normandy by people who did not speak French, who had a Serbian license plate, who seemingly used a Croatian phone line to cross the border immediately after dropping the pig's head from France to Belgium, and there might also be other connections. This could be, again, conditional, linked to the regular fashion that we have observed the Russian services to operate in a way to recruit cheap saboteurs or cheap provocateur agents in a very Cold War fashion. But they have recruited those people to, for example, and this is proven, to drop some caskets under the Eiffel Tower with a French flag on it and with the quote, French soldiers in Ukraine, when it was about, when there was more of a discussion into sending military aid into Ukraine a few years ago. So this has been proven that this kind of thing actually happens. So how do we react to that? By not knowing all of the facts, by not having the time as a political leader necessarily to know all of the facts before you have to take a position. That's the key vulnerability as well. So that's a way of communicating. I'm not saying that we should not be transparent and we should not say anything. I'm saying we should think twice before saying that something is something when you don't have the full facts. And that's a lot about sensitization, definitely.
Vielen Dank, darauf kommen wir auch nochmal zurück in der Diskussion.
Thank you very much. We will get back to that in our discussion. Now I would like to ask Akira Igata. We had already heard that hybrid tactics are a combination of attacks in several sectors. We were just talking about 13 dimensions. And in that, the weak spots of very strongly networked societies are exploited very much. And one sector that moves into the focus ever more in security policy is the financial and economic business sectors. Japan started earlier than other countries with economic dependencies being understood as a security matter. You're researching into exactly this field. In Europe, I believe it has only gained importance since very recently. What were the triggers for this change in strategy in Japan? And what concrete steps could be derived, maybe also for European countries like Germany?
Thanks so much. So I think during the morning session, we were talking a lot about the importance of democracy, justice, the importance of freedom and fairness. But I wanted to table this very unfortunate but perhaps pragmatic proposition that in order for us to really try to pursue these virtues, these values, and these strategic interests, we really need to align these things with business interests. because in order for us to create the space to make the decisions in order to pursue these values that we hold so dear or these strategic interests that we need to protect, we really need the businesses to make sure that they are economically autonomous from foreign influences. That's one of the reasons why Japan has been working on economic security policies. You can argue when it started, but I would say it started about 6-7 years ago. There has been various new developments in China regarding new Japanese business risks doing businesses in China. There has been pressures from the Trump 1.0 administration, and Japan realized that since we want to make our economy autonomous, but of course, government doesn't own the economy. It's the private sector that owns the economy. We have to take on new tools, new instruments, new organizations to deal with these new economic security threats. So what type of concrete policy innovation has happened in Japan regarding these economic security issues? Well, with the remaining time of 3 minutes, let me try to mention a few. One interesting thing is the increase in public-private partnership. There's now an official network in Japan called TTN, Trusted Think Tank Network, where the Japanese government regularly meet with about 20 selected think tanks and universities working on economic security issues so that the government can actually learn from policy innovations coming from the Japanese think tank sector. I'm happy to say that I'm one of them. There is also now a regular talks among important supply chains of strategic goods like raw materials or semiconductors and batteries and you name it, that includes not just the big companies, but also SMEs, small and medium enterprises, so that the government can understand where the vulnerabilities in supply chains actually lie. There's increasing instances of the private sector seconding their personnel to the government so that the private sector personnel can learn about strategic and security environments that they could not learn when they were in the private sector, and the government can learn from those seconded from the private sector about some of the industry supply chains and critical infrastructure and so on. So all of this is to show that the Japanese government is now trying to increase its public-private partnerships, so economic security intelligence is shared among both the public sector and the private sector, which would make it easier for the government to make the choices based on what the private sector wants and vice versa. Second, the government has been supporting supply chain diversifications. The government has identified about 13 strategic goods that's so important for Japan's industry that if a company said, look, we are currently too reliant on one country, so we're thinking about creating some other factory in either in Japan or in trusted countries, then the government would actually subsidize up to 50% of moving that supply chains away from that certain dependence. The government can now intervene into the critical infrastructures. So if a company that's in the critical infrastructure sphere is thinking about procuring a new goods, whether it's a new software or hardware or services, the government can actually intervene and say, you cannot use that certain software or hardware because there are too much risks involved in it. Maybe just one more. The government is now also helping with the development of critical and emerging technologies. We have certain major countries now trying to dominate some of the areas of important critical technologies like artificial intelligence or quantum or biomanufacturing. And if we end up relying too much on certain countries, then in the long term, we are not able to make our autonomous decisions regarding those technologies. So once again, the government is trying to subsidize some of these critical technologies so that we, in the next 10, 15, 20 years, we wouldn't be completely dependent on certain countries on certain technologies. And these are just parts of the various economic security policy innovations that has been happening in Japan, and I'll be more than happy to share others with you during the Q&A. Thanks.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much.
Für diese Einblicke in
Thank you very much for these insights concerning the strategic security in Japan. And you have a dedicated ministry for that, for economic security, which is quite unique, I think. It doesn't exist in other states. And before we link up to other European countries, I would like to move a bit geographically. You deal with hybrid threats, and well, actually, we have been talking about criticism about the concept of integrity. Another thing we have not been talking about is that it is a very Western concept, and we have seen that especially Western states find it difficult to recognize such threats because they have a very binary approach towards threats. When listening to us, where do you see blind spots in the European debate, whether in terms of concepts or geographically? Ms. Beverly, Ochieng.
Yeah, thank you for your question, and this discussion has been really eye-opening. I think it's about the sense of agency of some of these actors and some of the assumptions when we assign responsibility for who is behind a particular threat. So a couple of cases in point that I'll just bring that home on how it's been playing out in the region. Yesterday, there were 2 incidents. In Kenya, the authorities announced that they'd arrested a number of people who were apparently part of a trafficking ring of people who were being sent off to fight in Russia or in Ukraine on behalf of Russia. Kenyan nationals. On the other end, there is this influencer. His name is Ibrahim Amaiga. He is a Burkinabe based in Washington. He has about 1 million followers on each of his social media pages. And yesterday he announced that he was launching his own news website called Nouvelle Afrique. He spends a lot of time antagonizing Western media about their coverage, particularly of West Africa and the Sahel. And he sees his platform as a means through which they can have authentic narratives about what's going on in the region and on the continent. But it's a one-sided way of seeing things, of trying to legitimize military governments or trying to legitimize anti-democratic practices. And that is the space within which now European engagement or disengagement is finding an awkwardness with navigating around that environment. But it's not necessarily because these people are being influenced by Russia, because sometimes there's a heavy-handedness with how we see Russia's appeal or influence in the region. Yes, they have taken advantage of things that have existed already, whether it's anti-Western sentiment, whether it's the failure of military support or intervention by the French and then by extension by the European Union. And how the European Union can re-engage with the region has become very difficult because on the policy level, many of these governments are becoming hostile in their rhetoric, they're mistrustful in their engagements, and they're trying to look for more pragmatic ways to engage, particularly with more regional actors. And sometimes I think European policy only sees that a little bit too late in terms of how to be pragmatic. There's been a split in West Africa at the moment. So you've had the Economic Community of West African States, and then you had 3 countries leave and form their own alliance. That was underplayed for a very long time, but now it's become this fully fledged almost institution that is challenging the more hegemonic institutions that existed in the region. There are countries that are slowly acknowledging that. So you've had Ghana appointing an envoy to be able to discuss with the Sahel because they need to be able to consolidate, whether it's diplomacy, counterinsurgency, humanitarian support, political transition, and things like that. You have countries like Togo, for instance, which, democratically, they're sort of low on the barometer, but they've had very pragmatic relationships with countries that are becoming increasingly hostile towards the West. I think having an agility in terms of policy and being able to see those regional, cross-regional relations is one way through which Europe and the West can still remain relevant in the region, and also assigning agency and understanding where that agency comes from, rather than assuming that a power from outside is necessarily driving that. Russia isn't driving anything. They're simply taking advantage and using that as a vessel to be able to demonstrate that they can, aggravate or the war in Ukraine, but at the same time they can dislodge other partners within the region. But who are the other partners that people can work with to be able to consolidate or to be able to just reduce the levels of fragility that we're seeing, the information space being undermined, and who already have close collaboration with those governments to ensure that there's a sense of resilience. There's also lots of civil society groups that are at least trying to do the work in being able to build an infrastructure where information or the information space is not so severely undermined, where they're trying to work with other democratic actors to build resilience, because all of this might not last a very long time. It looks like a lengthy period. It's been, nearly 15 years of insurgency in Mali, spreading across the region. But it's not a mainstay. It's about building those resilient institutions that can take over when this transition is over. And I think sometimes the thinking tends to be very reactionary against what's happening now, as opposed to that long-term state building.
Vielen Dank für diese wichtige Einordnung.
Thank you very much for this interesting account. Before coming back to initiatives from civil society, I would like to pass the floor to Sara, and you certainly have a lot to comment on. The Green head of the caucus of the Greens in the Bundestag has called for a security campaign against such assaults. You criticized that drone-driven espionage has not been counteracted. And over the weekend, as we all noticed, a drone defense system has been announced, and a competence center without competence is useless, we just heard. So the question really is, what do we all need? We have heard already about security precautions, and we heard about the central role of civil society, and how can civil defense be clearly strengthened? Well, first of all, hello everybody. I'm sorry I can't be here today. I would like to remind you of a few things, because, well, the fact that we are now overwhelmed by the situation, that is a sorry fact, because in Ukraine, at the latest, starting in 2022, we saw that hybrid warfare is part and parcel of the Russian toolbox, so to speak. And we clearly have to say that Nancy Faeser and Olaf Scholz really did everything to see that we are concerned as well. In 2022, at the latest, we presented agendas to see what good streams go from Ukraine to Russia, and drone movements over critical infrastructure and military plant and machinery have been recorded. And last year we said it's a summer of sabotage, so it's all not new. Nonetheless, it was a big challenge for us to insert civil protection in the break on public debts. But apparently this was an alien concept, so it is now called civilian protection. I just want to remind you of this, because it is important that you note, or that we don't create an impression that everybody in Germany was surprised at what has been happening with an increased intensity across the NATO space. Well, Dobrindt was talking about a drone defense center. You can see it either way, but it's good that there is an awareness. I think it would have been necessary 6 months ago, and the whole range of threats is now being tackled. A few comments on the preceding speakers, and they said many important things. Just to add on that, I think that In Germany, we are in the focus, really. It is visible not only in a political behavior, but it is also a direct result of our geographical location, where it's a fact that without Germany, the Baltic states are difficult to defend, not just because of the forces we have, but Germany is also a transit country, and thus Putin is not trying to provoke us, but it is really preventive action. And they always have a military goal at the end of the day. And expressing it this way and saying it in all clarity is important, because people say, well, if we didn't support Ukraine, we wouldn't be affected by such things. But this is simply not true. I commute between North Rhine-Westphalia and Berlin, and at Hanover, it is interesting to see that so many things keep burning all the time. So this is not really in order to annoy train passengers, but it has clearly a military component. And as Maxime Lebrun put it, you know, the terror quote, I will certainly use that term as well. And you can, even if you have had no attributes so far, you nonetheless have to face up to the challenges. And there are also insights in terms of secret services, and sometimes they are discussed openly via the press. But the intention of Russia as a player that Russia is describing, where you do not need to know every detail, whether it was a hostile act from Russia or not, because if you know the intention, you can talk about it differently with the general population. Unfortunately, in Germany, we still have a very restrained communication. We share little secret service insight that we have about the intentions of Russia. And Great Britain has a different approach here. And I would really, really hope that we would also move into a different kind of communication concerning what we already know, not in isolated cases, but strategically on a broad basis. And Sara? Japan has not been prepared to the ecological component of hybrid threats, because in the toolbox, they have prepared better for this type of assault because it has a bigger share. In the toolbox, Russia used gas in order to show that, but the rest is yet unclear. I was glad about Ms. Okiewi's remark, because this fight for the hearts and minds of the people that move deeply into the democratic structures, this struggle is led on a global level, and it is supported by Russia. But there are also other destructive players who join in. And in Germany, I think it is sometimes hard to imagine that one invests in the hearts and minds in order to fuel democratic processes, but it is working, it's effective. And in Sahel, there are examples how big wheels, cogwheels, could be turned by the infiltration of debates and the hostility that has been the result in the political sphere. and recognizing all that is hard. And as we heard it earlier, it is not a new concept. And well, it is already in the art of warfare, it has been integrated that there are possibilities of imposing one's will on others. We now live in a time where at least two players, the Russians and the Chinese, are now putting the whole range of tools on the negotiation table, and we have to work on that. First of all, to understand that this is the way it is, and how to defend ourselves in the individual aspects.
Vielen Dank, Sara, für deine
Thank you, Sara, for this account, and thank you for putting things into perspective. And please give me a sign if you'd like to react to that. A question on attribution has been answered already. Another aspect has been mentioned, that players also take a look at the domestic challenges of their opponents, so that they take the wrong decisions or no decisions at all, so that our decision-making algorithms will be manipulated. I would like to know from you, Sara, how can legislators and states become better at protecting their infrastructure? I know that there are always efforts to be far-sighted and forward-looking in their planning. Well, we are all curious to hear about the transposition of the German Security Council decisions. And, well, what we really have to rehearse a bit more, also in the committees of the Deutsche Bundestag and at the ministries, is simply empathy with the other side. So what do I think Putin can do? What are they capable of doing? And what are they likely to do in the next few months and years? Actually, I've never been an advocate of the National Security Council, I have to add, and there are various reasons for that, but one of the reasons is that I do not believe that a change of the bodies would lead to any change in the people's mindset. And you can be ignorant and sit on a National Security Council or Center for Strategic Foreseeing could be established if the politics, that the political community that needs to prepare and take decisions, if they do not want to believe the range of threats, it is useless. So the first thing we really need is a change in people's mindsets when for decision makers at all responsibility levels. And I can't see that so far. So there's a lot of self-centeredness, really.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, the keyword of changing one's mindset in all areas. May I ask you about your view? Well, changing people's mindset, well, what we have already seen with a view to hybrid threats is that we need to build up resilience. And this, for example, by early recognition, strategic farsightedness. So minor elements have been established already. Better coordination between EU and NATO, what's on the table, and situation images are of key importance. And thus, and I'm deliberately putting it this way, we need to invest more into our own strength. We need to be able to deter the opponent or enemy so that the next step will be prevented. It is only out of strength and societal, economic, and also military strength that's a condition so that we will be resilient for the long term in a sustainable manner. And you also need the right mindset that is really decisive. And also, there is one thing we must not overlook when it comes to counteracting hybrid threats. We only react we only react. Couldn't we afford to act?
Gute Frage, die ich.
Thank you. A good question. I will leave it here. Should you want to react to that statement, feel free. And well, you are based in Helsinki, and we already heard about the Nordic states, and Mr. Kikin also mentioned it in this keynote. And he said they have further progressed. And also when it comes to the overall defense concept, and something that has not yet been entrenched in the German debate.
Yeah, so if I understand the question is about the follow-up to your statement and to speak a little bit about the Finnish model, right? Okay.
Yeah, and the model of total defense also. Total defense?
Yeah, sure. Okay, fine. Yes, so on the hybrid offense, yes, that's often a necessity or need that we are faced with and that we are questioned about. I'm always a little bit kind of nuanced on this aspect, because I think there is a very important concept about the proportionality of the use of force and discrimination of the use of force, the impossibility to target civilians. The problem with hybrid threat methods is that they inherently target civilian populations. So I don't think I will see it in my lifetime a kind of full-fledged doctrine on operating in a hybrid manner against an authoritarian state, because that would mean targeting their own civilian population to a certain extent. One example is the proliferating character of any cyber weapon. A cyber weapon or a cyber attack is proliferating in its very essence. It means that it crosses different thresholds of effect, which are difficult to predict, frankly. So it asks a lot of difficult dilemmas in terms of targeting and in terms of discrimination and proportionality. But that's my nuanced reaction to the hybrid offensive. On the total defense model, and specifically the Finnish example, so for full disclosure, I am not a Finn, I'm a Frenchman living in Helsinki, so I can observe that from an external eye. What I see is that, of course, it's a small society, it's a small country, which is quite homogeneous as well. The history is well shared, it is well understood. There isn't a lot of, let's say, controversy about history and what happened and who has been the essential foe for the last hundreds of years. It has been Russia, of course, and they have seen that on many occasions, and they have lived through that and built exactly this kind of a total defense concept, which is more about a comprehensive defense concept, because total defense concept was more during the Cold War, where those very large mechanized divisions needed to have the full support of the civilian population to function. Now comprehensive defense is a bit wider. It's about also the trust, but I would say the critical trust of society towards their government, because blind trust, of course, does not bring us very far. There's also a need to have critical thinking, and that's why I'm saying critical trust. But if I take the example about disinformation, for example, which is not working really well in Finland, it is that their education system has taught fairly early on to pupils to kind of see what is reality and what is fiction, to kind of assess sources critically. So that's why also disinformation does not work. There's also an aspect that Finnish language is fairly difficult. And it kind of shows easily if it's a disinformation with a Cyrillic character, and then kind of guess it in a way. But all jokes aside, it is not without challenges either. I mean, every society is kind of traversed by the same challenges. Who says conscription says also fitness of the population to be conscripted. And like in many countries, it is becoming more and more of a problem. There are more and more young men who are granted exemptions to military service for a lot of psychological issues as well. There was an article in the Helsinki Sanomat today, the main Helsinki news newspaper, that specifically pointed to this legacy of the COVID times as well. So yes, it is a comprehensive defense model. It's a comprehensive model of defense, which is not without its challenges, but it is extremely strong as well. There is a strong will to defend. It's one of the countries with the most with the most kind of consensus on the idea to take up arms and defend the mainland if need be one day. So it is very well funded as well. So that's also one point that we should make.
Vielen Dank auch, dass Sie nochmal den Punkt der Mentalität.
Thank you very much for also touching on the point of the mindset. Beverly, I would like to get back to the resilience work you had mentioned. Among other things, you were also talking about the role of the civil society. Maybe you can say something more on that, especially also with a view to public communication, as you have mentioned, namely that it is used in a very targeted way by players like Russia, or if we take a closer look, maybe also private companies of the military complex.
I mean, yeah, that's also complicated the work of civil society, because some of the groups that are emerging that would also qualify as sort of like a civil society or community movement are also those that have been co-opted by those actors. So on one end, it is a thriving environment across the region. It's a way of holding governments accountable. It's a way of making sure there's grassroots coordination on some of the concerns that affect people. It could be about access to basic necessities, and that has evolved over time. But I think increasingly it's about the kind of information that you interact with, either about what your government is doing for you or not doing for you, what external actors are doing or not doing for you. I mean, I can't tell you how many times anecdotally I have to tell my mom something that she sends me on WhatsApp is not real because it's coming from XYZ. And I think many people struggle with that because there's a big gap between how much the information space grew in the last decade. So online media, WhatsApp, having your phone. I mean, Chinese mobile phones are everywhere and they've made information so accessible to everyone. But the education gap and what you pointed out about where it starts, that critical thinking, hasn't always been there. And it's a thing that is still evolving, whether it's in the education system or how we interact with that technology. So people of, say, my parents' age don't have that. And I have to intervene constantly. And my son is learning a lot more than I have about how to use tech, right? But within those gaps, there's also how governments undermine that space. State media is often where you will get fairly accurate information. Of course, it's one-sided. It is being guided by the government. But state media in parts of West Africa now are becoming the means of propagating misinformation. Some of it is because of some training, either by China or Russia or other actors in the region, on how you should present information. If you're following, say, Mali over the last 2 to 3 weeks, there's been this, siege on the Western region, and it's had an impact on a variety of commercial, local operators, religious groups, and so on and so forth, for being targeted outrightly. On the government side, it's like, this is all fake. We've been able to get convoys to the capital, Bamako. We've been able to do this. They're keeping people from being able to talk to not just local media, but even international media. So getting a sense of truth is becoming increasingly difficult. And that means intervention is also very difficult because you don't know where the problem is and where it's stemming from. And without that accurate information, it's hard to be able to have the indices to know where intervention is always the words used. It's probably not the right one, but where intervention comes in, whether it's supporting socioeconomic initiatives or women's groups or, child welfare, that's one thing. But there are lots of groups that are trying to actively fight that. And it's been going on for a very long time. I worked in media for a long time, so it was working with civil society organizations that would be training journalists in being able to just report things authentically and being able to make sure they source information well and being able to show that they are accessible to the public and that they are a point of trust between whoever is sharing that information, them as the ones who are packaging it, and the public that's receiving it. And it's even things like WhatsApp. There's a group called What's Crap on WhatsApp, which is sort of a group that sort of picks all of the misinformation, disinformation, and tells people this is actually what the truth is. The UN radio had a really good program, Vrai ou Faux, which used to pick on like one very popular social media story, and then they'd break it down in Bambara for people just to be able to see that this was not for real, this helicopter that you saw. And speaking to people in their own languages has a really, really big impact. And also using that language to misinform them. The sense of authenticity through which Russian actors are driving that misinformation. Countering that obviously means vetting the civil society groups that one is working with. That can be a very difficult task, but there's always ways of doing that. People who are doing work not just for sharing information, but building community resilience. The authenticity is probably the most important thing. So sometimes it's not about you having to signpost yourself as we are really here to help you and save the day and help the world. No, it's also giving them, again, agency to do that, to share that information, to be able to educate people, to be able to connect communities. That tends to be where it lies. And also being proactive in understanding how other actors, whether they're working with the military governments or with Russia, or with other people who want to sort of create mistrust in that information space, how dynamic they are and how they're moving and being responsive to that. That's what works. All-out military action has obviously not been a solution for various conflicts in the region. And I think there was an earlier realization towards that. When the G5 Sahel, before it collapsed, there had been a plan to, have like a community radio, have a few social initiatives alongside the defense force. That didn't get as much support. So at the time when it collapsed, it meant that that entire infrastructure, which could have been inherited when the other Western forces was leaving, was no longer there to be able to support community resilience and responsiveness.
Vielen Dank für diese Ergänzungen.
Thank you very much for these supplementary comments. Akira, Sara correctly said that the Japanese context is, of course, different from what we try to address here at the moment. Still, because you were venturing so specific ideas and actions here, and I know you're focusing on Asia-Pacific, I would like to ask for concrete policy recommendations. You're following our debate, so what would you advise our parliamentarians and also ministerial staff? What would you recommend to them so that the topic of economic security can also be kept on the radar by them?
Sure. So once again, the situation in Japan and Germany is different, but I would like to share how Japan's National Security Council seems to be working with regards to dealing with economic security issues. So in Japan, there's two levels. Right? There's National Security Council, which is composed of politicians, ministers, but then there's also the bureaucrats, about 100 of them in National Security Secretariat, NSS. And these 100 bureaucrats are being seconded from different ministries, the best and the brightest, right? There is about 6 or 7 of them from each ministry. So any information, any issues regarding economic security, meaning it's not immediately clear which ministry is going to be charged, or if it's something that crosses over different ministries, it first goes to the NSS. And then there would be this interministerial coordination happening among these 100 people. So this has worked because up until about 6 or 7 years ago, we had the NSS, and they have only been looking at defense issues or security issues. But we've created a 7th new division within the NSS called the Economic Division, which is going to be looking at economic security issues. Now, this meant that now different ministries, from Ministry of Economy to Foreign Affairs to Defense, financial agencies, to the police agencies, to intelligence agencies, they've all had to create a new economic security division within their ministries so that they can communicate with the NSS. So in a way, this really worked because, and once again, this could be a chicken and egg situation, but now that they've created this new organization, they now had to follow information regarding critical infrastructure. Before, no one really cared about what where the submarine cables are being laid down in the Nordic areas, for example. But now they have to follow this information. They didn't care about supply chains or batteries. Well, now they have to go to the private sector and talk to the companies about this. By creating this new division, they had to follow these information. They had to analyze it and bring it up to the politicians. So once again, this worked in the Japanese context. So perhaps it might be worth thinking about whether or not there are some parts that could be replicated in Germany as well. Another issue about the disinformation is similar efforts are being done in Japan as well. Except what's not working in Japan is the fact that it's sometimes hard to measure the actual impact of disinformation, right? So it feels like we're fighting in the dark. Like, we know there are bullets flying through this way, and we're trying to counter disinformation by strategic communication, but we're still shooting at targets which we're not sure where it is. Because we can see all of these weird disinformation and narratives on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or you name it, but the actual impact that it had on, let's say, the voting or the thinking of certain bureaucrats aren't really it's hard to measure that. So if there's a way for us to kind of try to think about evidence-based policy making where we can see these are the numbers, these are the measurements in which we can say that this disinformation narrative is sometimes something that we have to counter, but these disinformation narratives are something that we can ignore, then maybe there's a way for us to share these kind of information and intelligence better among Japan, Indo-Pacific countries, and Europe so that we can better think about what to counter.
Vielen Dank für diese weiteren Ideen, auch für unseren nationalen.
Thank you very much for these further ideas, also for our National Security Council. There are still a few question marks about it. Before I pass the floor back to Sara, let me announce that afterwards I would like to open the floor for questions from the audience. So please already start to think about your questions. Yes, thank you. You will get to say after the round. Sara, I would like to refer to one contribution to our conference dossier. It's also on our website. This is another reading recommendation at this point from one of our partners in Brussels, Alice Stolmeyer of Defend Democracy. She was asking whether at the moment we're investing in the right things. She was saying that we mainly invest in hardware, in tanks, weapons, UAVs, missiles, also in software, artificial intelligence, cyber, but not in what Elise calls wetware, that is our resilience, in the cohesion in our society. And she's asking, why do we prepare so much for conventional warfare and so little to hybrid warfare, which has become a reality for long? I know that you exactly have used your weight in favor of that, also in the debate about the so-called debt break, that is the sound budget provision. But how can we get these topics back to the focus of the debate, do you think?
Well,
I just believe through the further aggravation of the situation, this will necessarily have to happen, that we look into that in greater detail. Also, from the opposition position, we will put on pressure on the Minister of Interior to embrace that. I would like to make 2 points now. Yes, it is disastrous if we reduce the social system, don't take enough care of our young people, let people migrate into the precariat, cause social stress through all the reductions the new coalition has now initiated, both domestically and also in development cooperation, because then this creates exactly this hotbed for this misinformation and hearts and minds changes in Europe and globally. This hotbed becomes even bigger, and this will cause even more problems for us with finding coherent answers to these threats in our societies. Still, I'm warning against pretending that we are not facing a conventional conflict in Europe. We already have it on the territory of Ukraine, and I do assume it will spread. Why? Just because Russia has territorial interests, and territory is not what I can manage via hearts and minds. You can't be successful through that. But this is what I win with hardware. And I can combat hardware only with hardware. So I would not play that off against each other. I'm not saying we need to invest more in hybrid threats and not in tanks. Unfortunately, both has to happen, because in the end of the day, Putin has territorial interests. And the hybrid tools are just a means to an end. And in the end, there's always also the appropriation of land with the respective hardware. And then we need, of course, traditional military means to counter that. Thanks so much, Sarah. I now open the floor for your question. Please briefly introduce yourself and also indicate to what person you're directing your question. We're particularly glad about short questions. First, this gentleman over here, where's the microphone?
Nee, hinter Ihnen noch, genau, sorry. Es kommt schon, ja.
It's coming.
Für das Dolmetschen ist es aber...
The microphone must be used for the interpretation, of course.
An General Schrödl.
The question goes to General Schrödl. Thank you for coming in uniform. You're helping Germany to wake up. This was one question this morning. Germany must become normal again, like all nations worldwide. Germany is not an exception. I was born in Algeria. Now the question.
You
said acting, correct, but before one can act, one needs to define. How do you define your foe? This was a concept of the CDU and also of the Christian Democrats and also Trump.
Und Springer sagen, Islam ist der Chef.
The Jews and Springer say Islam is the boss. So I'm just quoting Welt. What is your answer?
Eine zweite Frage gerne.
Well, a second question.
Hallo, Clara Schöpfel, tatsächlich von der Bundesgeschäftsstelle.
Clara Schöpfel, I'm from the German Secretariat of the Greens. This is mainly a question for Sara, and I will speak German for that reason. Well, concerning the disinformation campaigns and linking them up with economic interests, we talked about it. On the one hand, the model with Finland, the media literacy, and dealing with disinformation. And what's really important, digital platforms. On the one hand, our dependency that is becoming very obvious at the moment, and ways and means and possibilities on the one hand to regulate these platforms, and also finding alternatives in the context of these threats.
Ja, Ole Jacobs, ich bin
Udo Jacobs, I'm a member of the Green Party in Berlin. My question is maybe to Sara and others. Well, civil threats and real threats.
Das war auch Thema des letzten Sicherheitspapiers der BAX.
This was also a topic in BAX. Well, in terms of strategic communication on the level of ministries and at the level of politicians, how can you improve communication? What strategies are there? Where do we need to catch up in order to create this and improve this resilience? We'll have a second round in a minute, and we should answer these questions collectively. And if anyone else would like to comment, do tell me so.
Ich glaube, wir müssten immer aufpassen.
Well, I think we need to be careful not to be against all the time. What are we in favor of? We are in favor of the rule of law and democracy, and also the rule of international law. This should be our strength. We also expect others to abide by international law, which also means that we are now preparing day by day to even have a military confrontation, and that we need to succeed there. If I look at our comrades in Lithuania, how they grow up and how they are stepping up their military strength, they stand for the values of democracy, for free and peaceful coexistence of peoples in Europe. This is the motivation that they live on. And of course, we are looking at the opponent, and we are trying to check where to find a point of attack. This is our military doing, that's obvious. But we need to move away from polarization and see what we are in favor of, also in my military competence. How can we improve strategically? Well, we have strategic documents like the National Security Strategy and our defense strategy. This is for a technical audience. This is not communicated in the broader public, and we need to find a more widespread communication strategy. As it has been communicated strategically, this was forgotten already. In 2017 in Lithuania, there was an incident where German soldiers were reproached a rape of a 13-year-old girl. This was launched by Russia. It was the Lithuanian government that said there is nothing true about the story. It is not true at all. Such incidents need to be communicated. We need to show tangible examples that will then unfold a strategic effect. And the power of examples is a very strategic factor here. Okay, Sara, would you like to comment on digital platforms? Yes, and I would also like to add something on strategic communication. The problem is not that nobody is thinking about it, but the political will to tell the population that we are more or less in a time of pre-war. Nobody likes to say that. If we did, everything could not be done in the field of strategic communication. The old government, the former government, was as poor in that discipline as we are, because people start off, but they don't finish off. Like Russia is kind of annoying us, but really Putin would like to extend that war, and we are in a pre-war era, but nobody would like to admit that, frankly. And China and a threat from China, nobody wants to pronounce that, and then we can't make progress here. And then, the platforms, the social platforms and media, well, there are rules in Europe of what is permissible and what is not. Some users don't abide by these rules, and the platforms don't enforce or monitor or stop people who infringe. TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, you would have to communicate that if you don't manage to abide by the law in your operations, you can't continue to operate in Europe anymore. This is the way you need to attack them, like, oh, it's such a pity, but we can't do anything about it. This is not a strategy. I think the population sometimes does not even have an idea how poorly the existing rules are enforced. Then in the other way, it can't understand how much disinformation is spread on these platforms. The initial platform, I don't have any enemies. And this is, again, a language that is not permissible. But there are governments who have declared us as enemies. And you know, anything else is a conspiration theory. We don't have enemies, really. Well, there are even more questions here. For the next round. I'm Center from European Policy. I only have a short comment, no question, and this may not make life easier for you. It is communication about warfare. My impression is that in Germany, unfortunately, with a view to Ukraine and the war of Russia on Ukraine was you know, Russia really wanted to gain time. We saw it because there was a talk about offensive and defensive weapons. We don't differentiate anymore between these weapon systems. And then we talked about escalation spirals and downward spirals. Now we are talking about security guarantees, but we are not talking about how Ukraine could be integrated in our security architecture. My impression is that for Russia, it is really about distracting attention from our security architecture. We keep talking about Russia, and we simply delve into this disinformation structure. But it's not only about platform public debates that influence German public opinion. Like we talked about resilience in Ukraine. We are taking this over because we also quoted the example of Ukraine. Like it is no coincidence that Ukraine was taken for this cooperation and for this operation, and this was to weaken Ukraine. And with a view to resilience building and also with a view to security architecture, I would say that we should really call a spade a spade. The danger and the threat is Russia. Okay, we only have 5 minutes left, so could you please be brief in your questions? There is a comment over here, or a question rather.
Vielen herzlichen Dank. Marius Moniak, mein Name.
Very much. My name is Marius Moniak. I am a scholar of the Böll Foundation and a student. Thank you for these precise questions and answers. The change of mindset is my focus. It has been mentioned several times, but not only on a political level, but also on the level of the population. And this military strategic thinking in this round of experts, it has been mentioned at great length. In large parts of the population, it is in the center, left and right. It is at least alien to groups in society and even groups in the government. It is a very long process to change the mindset. However, I would be interested to hear what could be the role of individual political parties, especially the Green parties that is entrenched in grassroots movements that wanted to overcome the military in the 70s and 80s. At least the militarization of society in the 20th century was something they wanted to overcome. How can the Green Party contribute to a democratic resilience and a military approach to defending democracy? How can you establish these principles in society? Thank you. Okay, and if the questions could be even shorter, that would be great. Then over here, thank you. David Bartel. I am the head of the Böll office in Istanbul. I've got a question to Mr. Schrödl and to Sara Nanni.
The relevance and
integration of Turkey in the German security architecture and policy in the event of war or in a pre-war era that we're in, as Sara rightly put it. This is associated with another question because you just emphasized the values, but a question to Sara. How can we succeed in integrating Turkey? Because Turkey is the second biggest army in the NATO, and in terms of digitalization, it has progressed further than Germany. So how do we associate that with our values when we have to admit that Turkey is just a few steps away from a military dictatorship? Thank you. Next question.
Dankeschön.
My name is Juliane Müller, and I'm from the legal department from the Defense Ministry. And I'm wondering about how we react to provocations, and hybrid provocations, and maybe even assaults or attacks. One question for Mr. Igata: how would Japan react? How does Japan react with provocations from China, for example? And then for you, General Schrödl, you just said that one should act more rather than react. So my fear is if we only react and if we only walk along the beaten path, like what Russia or the bully is expecting, you would kind of fall directly into the trap. So what is your advice? Thank you. Basically, we only have 1 minute left, so just a short remark. First of all, for Mr. Igata, concerning dealing with provocation.
Sure. Quick 2 points. First, going back to the digital platform part, I want to show what Japan is doing at the moment. ChatGPT, generative AI, the Japanese government is now thinking of subsidizing to create a Japanese champion because we don't want to be too dependent on other countries. We are already subsidizing cloud services to Japanese companies because, once again, we don't want to be too dependent on other countries. TikTok, YouTube, we don't really have a good one in Japan, so nothing is happening at the moment, but that could change in the future. And then regarding provocation from China, define provocation, right? You're already seeing Chinese ships around Senkaku Islands, and we are trying to defend our territorial seas. You are already seeing certain flights from China, and we are having sorties to try and make sure that China doesn't provocate any further. So we are already responding. Of course, what everyone's now talking about in Japan is, as we have been talking about here as well, a potential for a contingency over the Taiwan Straits. And there are there are hundreds of policy simulations being done at the political level, at the business level, at the university and think tank level to try and prepare for what to do if certain contingencies happen.
Vielen Dank für diese sehr rasche Antwort. Ich glaube, die anderen Fragen waren vor allem an...
Thank you very much. I think the next questions were also for General Schrödl and for Ms. Nanni MP. So short answers, please. Beverly?
Wow, there's a lot to still say, but I think broadly speaking, there will be general threats towards democracy directed towards, African countries and governments, especially as the world's attention is directed towards various other crises taking place. Russia will take advantage of that to continue showing itself as both a threat to the world, but also a friend to countries that are willing to cooperate. It's still worth keeping an eye on that. It's still worth maintaining open doors for cooperation and finding more practical, pragmatic ways of remaining relevant in the region. So it's not a completely closed door just because a few countries, if you compare where Russia is and where everyone else still making an impact, it's a much, much smaller margin. But also remembering that these countries have their own sense of, autonomy and understanding that and being able to find ways of aligning policy with the thinking around where they see themselves autonomously and which kind of creative groups, civil society, media, government, and so on, are worth, making inroads with to make an impact in the region.
Vielen Dank. Maxime.
Yes, I would like to make just one point because to let you the time to answer, of course. And it was about the question about the platform regulation and about disinformation. Just one point is that as long as we don't get out to a significant extent of the regulation model, which is based on third-party third-party user generation content, then we will not kind of win in this debate, because we will constantly play cat and mouse. I mean, the platforms have to be responsible for the content that is on them, because they present it according to an algorithm, and that is, to me, a key message as such, because for now they consider that they're not responsible because the content is not generated by the platform itself but by the users. So as long as we don't get out of this impossible loop, I don't see how can we strategically advance in the battle against disinformation online.
Vielen Dank. General Schrödl.
Gut, die Türkei-Frage.
Well, the question about Turkey, I think we could talk at length about it a lot longer than 30 seconds. Just to mention one point, in 2012, I worked together at NATO headquarters, and he was jailed after he came back to Turkey. And next week I'm traveling to Turkey, and I will have high-level meetings with the General Inspector, and we will have to mention things openly. Turkey is an extremely important bridge country. It is a NATO member, and for strategic reasons alone, it is indispensable for us. So this is as far as Turkey is concerned. And then hybrid warfare, what can we do? Well, it is quite interesting. The Defense Ministry is asking a question to the Defense Ministry here. We need to be more decided in our action and rhetoric. Well, there is a shadow fleet in front of Rügen Island. A ship was intercepted, and the crude oil needed to be sold. And we need to reinforce that within the range of our possibilities. We need to detect and like repumping of oil on the Mediterranean Sea from one vessel to the other, and then it is sold, creating the level of transparency so that the general public gets a better understanding. So we have the means, we just need to implement them more decidedly.
Sara für die Schlussbemerkungen.
Sara for the final remarks.
Ja, zur Türkei, gute Gespräche dann, Herr General, nächste Woche. Es ist ja nicht so, als wenn diese
Well, good luck for the talks next week, General. It's not that this ambiguity is not visible permanently for everyone who's into security policy. It's not that we tune it out or something like that. Still, I would say that the cooperation in NATO, where there are also shared rules on how to act,
demokratisierenden Effekt auf die Mitgliedsländer hat.
Always has a democratizing impact on the member states. This is what I would leave it at. Which doesn't make the problem smaller, though, but
verständlicher, man einfacher damit umzugehen.
Maybe more comprehensible and thereby easier to deal with. I also would like to answer the question what role the Greens can play so that this mindset shift in the population can be achieved. I believe that we as a political party and also as a movement, as Greens, are predestined that this inner buy-in which we need in the population can be discussed by us. As you correctly say, we emanate from an anti-militarist movement, a movement that was partly even radically pacifist. And at the latest, with the Balkan Wars, we had to move our understanding of military force to a different level. And across the whole political party, it must penetrate what it means if the other one does not want to talk. And this is exactly the situation in which we are. I believe we can play a very important role here, in particular because we do not shy away from also naming chasms which are opening up for the mankind. I mean, we're not talking about the climate crisis like everyone else, but we are talking about it a bit more unequivocally than all others because we have no fear years pronouncing these things. And I think the same is advisable to do as far as the challenge is concerned we're facing with Russia and China.
Vielen Dank, Sara.
Thank you so much, Sara, and thanks to all of you for your wise opinions and assessments. Also, thanks a lot for the critical questions from the audience. We will stop here, but certainly this conversation will continue elsewhere, certainly also in the coffee break, also generally the conference on inner security. Our domestic colleagues will organize here in the Foundation on the 21st of September, so we cordially invite you to that too. Our next foreign policy conference will take place as early as at the end of January next year and will again look into the same complex of topics. So thanks again for your time and attention. I would now like to give you leave to a 30-minute coffee break, slightly less than 30 minutes though, and welcome you back for the next keynote with Susanna Mohammed at 3:30. Thank you.